Did you know that Scott Stapp, once the powerful voice of Creed, fell from rock stardom into a battle with addiction and loss? From Danny Kirwan's heartbreaking exit from Fleetwood Mac to Mick Mars' painful departure from Mötley Crüe, try not to gasp when you see these 20 rock legends today. 1. Scott Stapp, Creed. Scott Stapp once had everything: a powerful voice, fame, and a place in rock history. In the late 1990s, Creed was everywhere, selling millions of albums and performing to packed arenas. Stapp's deep, emotional singing made their songs unforgettable, but behind the success, things were falling apart. The pressure of fame became overwhelming, and instead of handling it, he turned to alcohol and substances. His once strong voice began to waver, his performances became unpredictable, and his relationships with bandmates soured. The man who once stood at the top of the charts was slipping, and fans could see it happening in real time. In 2002, during a concert in Chicago, things took a shocking turn. Stapp stumbled through the performance, his voice cracked, and his words made little sense. It was clear something was wrong. That night marked the beginning of the end for Creed's golden era. The band fell apart, and Stapp, once the face of rock, was left fighting his demons alone. After Creed split, Stapp tried to go solo, but something was missing. His personal struggles were impossible to ignore, overshadowing his talent. The same man who once delivered powerful emotional ballads was now battling to even stay on stage. Every performance felt like a fight, and the energy that made Creed great seemed gone. He attempted reunions, tried to reclaim his past success, but the damage was already done. The rock world had moved on, and Stapp's name was no longer celebrated. It was whispered in conversations about what could have been. His story is one of incredible highs and devastating lows, a reminder that fame is not always a gift. 2. Danny Kirwan, Fleetwood Mac. Danny Kirwan had talent most musicians could only dream of. His guitar playing gave Fleetwood Mac a unique sound, helping shape the band's early success. His songwriting was delicate and emotional, setting him apart from others in the group. But as the band's fame grew, so did the pressure. Kirwan was young, sensitive, and not built for the chaos of the rock star lifestyle. The endless touring, the long recording sessions, the expectation to always be perfect, it all became too much. Instead of finding support, he turned to alcohol, hoping it would quiet his mind. Instead, it pushed him further away from the people who could help. By 1972, Kirwan's troubles were impossible to ignore. The band saw his drinking worsen, and his behavior became more unpredictable. Then came the night that changed everything. Before a performance, Kirwan refused to go on stage. Instead, he smashed his guitar in frustration, breaking it into pieces. His bandmates were stunned. The anger, the sadness, the weight of everything he had been carrying. It all exploded in that one moment. That night, he was fired from Fleetwood Mac. Without the band, Kirwan's life spiraled out of control. The fame and fortune were gone, and in their place came loneliness and struggle. He drifted from place to place, his talent wasted, his name forgotten by most. Years later, stories emerged of Kirwan living in hostels, far from the spotlight he once commanded. A musician with the ability to change rock music had become a cautionary tale. His story is heartbreaking, a reminder that talent alone isn't enough to survive the world of fame. 3. Mick Mars, Mötley Crüe. Mick Mars was the backbone of Mötley Crüe, the steady force in a band known for chaos. While the others partied hard, Mars focused on the music. His heavy guitar riffs made their songs legendary, giving them a sound unlike any other. But behind the powerful performances, he was hiding a painful truth. Mars had ankylosing spondylitis, a disease that made his spine stiffen and his movements painful. Every night on stage was a battle, against his own body, yet he never let it show. Fans saw the rock star, not the suffering. But as the years passed, the disease worsened, and Mars could no longer ignore it. In 2022, he made a decision no one expected. He retired from touring. The guitarist who had spent decades playing through pain could no longer keep up. Fans were heartbroken, but what happened next made things even worse. Instead of parting ways peacefully, Mars found himself in a brutal fight with his own band. Accusations of greed, betrayal, and disrespect filled the headlines. The band he helped build was now pushing him aside, treating him as if he no longer mattered. Lawsuits followed, and the drama overshadowed his legacy. A man who had given everything to rock music was left battling not just his disease, but those he once called brothers. Mick Mars' story is a harsh reminder of how fame works. You can be a legend one day and forgotten the next. His fight isn't just against his illness, it's against the very industry he spent his life building. The saddest part? The story isn't over yet, and it may only get worse. Devore, Johnny Lane, Warrant. Johnny Lane had it all: fame, talent, and a voice that could shake an entire arena. Warrant ruled the charts with anthems like Cherry Pie and Heaven, songs that defined an era of glam metal. But fame can be cruel. What the world saw was a rock star living the dream. What they didn't see was a man drowning under the weight of success. The pressure to stay on top, to keep delivering hit after hit, became unbearable. Johnny turned to alcohol, believing it would help him cope. Instead, it dragged him into a darkness he could never escape. His bandmates watched as he changed. His voice remained powerful, but the energy, the fire, was fading. The industry had no mercy for those who lost their edge. The music business moves fast, and the moment you stumble, it leaves you behind. Johnny tried to keep up, but his demons ran faster. He left Warrant, convinced that a solo career would save him. But without the band, without the machine that had once lifted him to fame, he struggled. The magic was gone, and so was the world's patience. Every comeback attempt was followed by another setback. Every attempt at sobriety ended in another relapse. The industry whispered about his downfall, and the headlines only cared about the worst moments of his life. The man who once stood at the top was now fighting just to survive. Instead of being known for his voice, his music, his unforgettable performances, he became another tragic name in the long list of rock stars who lost everything. His final days were lonely, a slow, painful fall from the top. No encores, no triumphant returns, just silence. 5. Pete Doherty, The Libertines. Pete Doherty was supposed to be the future of rock. He had everything: raw talent, charisma, and lyrics that spoke straight to the soul. The Libertines were more than just a band. They were a movement, a spark of rebellion in an era that needed it. But Pete had another battle to fight, one that no amount of talent could save him from. Addiction took hold of him, and it never let go. At first, it was just stories in the tabloids, whispers of late-night parties, and reckless behavior. Then it became impossible to ignore. He wasn't just using, he was drowning. His bandmates couldn't rely on him. The music took a back seat to chaos. Every missed show, every disastrous performance chipped away at his career. Fans still cheered for him, still hoped for a turnaround, but every step forward was followed by 2 steps back. The Libertines split, reunited, and split again, but Pete's problems never left. He spent more time in courtrooms and rehab centers than in recording studios. His reputation changed from rock poet to troubled addict. The headlines focused on his arrests, his overdoses, his endless cycle of self-destruction. The talent never left, but the world stopped waiting. Instead of leading a generation, he became a warning. How many times can someone fall before they can't get up again? How many second chances can a person waste? Even now, the question lingers. Was he a genius destroyed by addiction, or just another rock star who threw it all away? The answer is written in the wreckage of a career that could have been legendary. 6. Ritchie Blackmore, Deep Purple Rainbow. Ritchie Blackmore wasn't just a great guitarist. He was a legend. His hands created some of the most unforgettable riffs in rock history. Smoke on the Water, Highway Star. These weren't just songs. They were anthems, the kind of music that makes crowds roar and stadiums shake. But then he did something no one saw coming. He walked away. Rock music had given him everything: fame, success, a place in history. And yet, in the mid-1990s, he turned his back on it. No more electric solos, no more powerful, explosive performances. Instead, he chose to play Renaissance-inspired music with Blackmore's Night. Fans were stunned. Why would someone at the peak of their career abandon the world they helped build? Some called it a bold move, a true artist following his passion. Others saw it as the greatest loss in rock history. How does someone go from filling arenas to playing medieval ballads for small, quiet crowds? The transition wasn't just surprising, it was heartbreaking. The rock world lost one of its greatest players, and he never one of its giants forever. 7. Peter Frampton. Peter Frampton was on top of the world in 1976. His live album, Frampton Comes Alive, didn't just sell millions, it turned him into a rock superstar. Every radio station played his songs, and fans couldn't get enough of him. But fame can be cruel, and his success wouldn't last forever. His next album failed to impress, selling far fewer copies, and the pressure to keep his career alive only grew heavier. Then came his role in Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. What should have been a fun project turned into a nightmare. The film was a disaster, and it didn't just ruin his credibility, it crushed his career. Hollywood laughed at it, and critics ripped it apart. Frampton, once beloved, became a joke in the industry. But the worst was still to come. In 1978, Frampton's life took another tragic turn. He was in a horrific car crash that left him badly injured. Recovery was slow and painful. Just when he thought things couldn't get worse, another tragedy hit. His beloved guitar, the one that had been with him through his greatest moments, was lost in a plane crash. Imagine that, years of hard work, all tied to an instrument that simply vanished. It was as if fate was determined to take everything away from him. The magic that made Frampton Comes Alive so special seemed lost. Though he continued making music, the world had already moved on. Fans still cheered for him, but it was no longer about his new work. It was nostalgia, a reminder of what once was. Instead of ruling the music world, he became a performer who played old hits, a living echo of the past. His story is a harsh lesson about fame. One moment you can be everywhere, and the next you are forgotten. He still tours today, but it's clear that the days of being a legend are long gone. He had the talent, the drive, and the success, but in the end, it wasn't enough. What happened to Peter Frampton is proof that in the world of fame, even the brightest stars can burn out too soon. 8. Anthony Michael Hall. Anthony Michael Hall once had Hollywood at his feet. The 1980s were his playground, and he was the king of teenage movies. With The Breakfast Club and 16 Candles, he wasn't just another actor. He was an icon. He had the perfect mix of charm, awkwardness, and talent that made him unforgettable. But fame doesn't always last. As he grew older, things started changing. The roles that once came so easily stopped appearing. The industry, so eager to cast him in the past, now saw him as just another actor struggling to fit in. He was no longer the fresh-faced teen everyone loved. Hollywood had moved on, and he was left behind. Desperate to stay relevant, Hall tried everything. He took on more serious roles, played villains, and even changed his image. But nothing worked. By the 1990s, he was barely holding on. The industry that once loved him now ignored him. He had talent, but talent alone doesn't keep you in Hollywood. Without the right roles, the right connection, and the right timing, even the best actors can fade away. And that's exactly what happened. Friends like Vince Vaughn tried to help him make a comeback, but it was never the same. The golden boy of the 1980s was now a forgotten face. The cruel part of Hollywood is that it never looks back. Hall still works today, but it's mostly in small roles, far from the spotlight he once owned. He is remembered, but not for what he is doing now, only for what he did decades ago. He was supposed to have a long, successful career, but instead, he became another cautionary tale. Fame can give everything, but it can also take it away in an instant. Anthony Michael Hall learned that the hard way. What happened to him is a reminder that Hollywood never truly cares about its stars. It only cares about what they can offer in the moment. And once that moment is gone, so are they. 9. Dave Finnegan, The Commitments. Dave Finnegan once stood on the edge of greatness. When The Commitments hit theaters in 1991, the world took notice. The film was a smash, capturing the raw energy of a struggling Irish soul band, and Finnegan's performance was a highlight. It seemed like the start of something big. But while the movie soared, the real-life band crumbled. Behind the scenes, egos clashed, ideas collided, and dreams broke apart. The band members, who should have been celebrating, instead found themselves lost in endless arguments. Before long, it was over. For Finnegan, that ending was just the beginning of a long struggle. With no band and no clear direction, he faced an industry that had already moved on. His name was tied to a movie, not a long-lasting music career. The offers didn't come pouring in. Instead, reality hit hard. Without steady work, his finances took a hit, forcing him into difficult choices. The dream had turned into something else entirely. Fans still remember him for that brief moment in the spotlight, but the years that followed were not kind. His story became one of missed chances and an industry that left him behind. Could things have been different? Maybe. But in the ruthless world of music, second chances are rare. And for Dave Finnegan, the moment that should have launched him instead became a weight that pulled him down. 10. Peter Wolf, J. Geils Band. Peter Wolf owned the stage. As the frontman of the J. Geils Band, he had everything: energy, talent, and the kind of presence that made crowds go wild. The 1980s were good to him. The band's music was everywhere, and Wolf was at the center of it all. But in rock and roll, nothing lasts forever. The band's success began to slip. The magic that once held them together started to fade. It was happening fast, and Wolf knew it. By the time the band's moment passed, Wolf was left chasing a shadow. He tried to keep the momentum going, releasing solo albums, writing songs, and even putting out a memoir. But nothing quite clicked. The fans who had once screamed his name were now listening to newer voices. He wasn't the star anymore. He fought to stay relevant, but the industry can be unforgiving. His memoir offered glimpses into his past, but books don't bring back the stage. His music still exists, but it no longer holds the same power. He had it all, and then, like so many before him, he found himself watching it slip through his fingers. Was there ever a way to stop it? Or was the fall always inevitable? 11. Vince Neil, Mötley Crüe. Vince Neil was the face of Mötley Crüe. In the 1980s, they ruled the rock scene. The music, the parties, the fame, it was a wild ride, and Neil was in the middle of it all. But the higher you climb, the harder you fall. And for Neil, the fall was brutal. In 1984, his world changed forever. Driving under the influence, he crashed his car. His passenger, Hanoi Rocks drummer Nicholas Razzle Dingley, didn't survive. Neil faced manslaughter charges, but a short sentence did little to stop his downward spiral. The years that followed were filled with bad choices. The drinking never stopped. The arrests kept coming. His personal life was a storm of failed relationships, legal battles, and moments that made headlines for all the wrong reasons. But it wasn't just his personal life that suffered. His music did too. Fans noticed the change. His voice wasn't the same. His energy on stage seemed to vanish. The Vince Neil of the 1980s, the rock star who could command an entire stadium, was gone. Even when Mötley Crüe reunited, the magic wasn't there. It was clear that Neil's demons had taken their toll. What went wrong? Could he have turned things around? The music industry is filled with stories of redemption, but for Vince Neil, every attempt to reclaim his past only seems to highlight how much has been lost. 12. Steven Tyler, Aerosmith. Steven Tyler had everything. A legendary voice, a band that changed rock music, and a career that seemed unstoppable. Aerosmith was a force. Their songs, from Dream On to Walk This Way, became anthems. But while the world saw a rock star, behind the scenes, Tyler was fighting battles that nearly destroyed him. The late 1970s were the beginning of the storm. Tyler and guitarist Joe Perry became known as the Toxic Twins, a name that wasn't just for show. Substances fueled their lifestyle, and the consequences were devastating. In 1979, Perry left the band, and without him, things got even worse. Then came 1980. Tyler, struggling more than ever, was in a serious motorcycle accident. It should have been a wake-up call. Instead, it pushed him deeper into addiction. The early 1980s were rough for Aerosmith. The albums didn't sell like they used to. The concerts weren't packed. Fans were watching their idols fall apart. It wasn't until Tyler finally checked into rehab that things changed. He fought his way back. The comeback was real. Aerosmith reclaimed their throne in the late 1980s. But the scars never fully faded. The years of self-destruction had taken their toll. Now, as time moves forward, the question remains, how much more does Tyler have left to give? He has survived when so many others didn't. But even legends have limits. How long can he keep running before the past catches up with him? 13. Don Dokken. Don Dokken was once a rock powerhouse, a name that sent fans into a frenzy every time his band hit the stage. In the 1980s, Dokken's music dominated the charts with hits like Alone Again and In My Dreams, making him a legend in the glam metal scene. His vocal issues that have haunted his career. Internal conflicts within the band created chaos, leading to breakups and reunions that never quite brought back the magic. The music industry moved on, and Don struggled to keep up. Once at the top of the world, he now fights to hold on to what remains of his legacy. 14. Steve Marriott, Small Faces, Humble Pie. Steve Marriott was a powerhouse in rock music, a name that once meant electrifying energy, raw talent, and an unforgettable voice. He wasn't just a singer, he was the soul of Small Faces and later Humble Pie, pouring his heart into every song and leaving audiences in awe. His voice had a rare intensity, something that could shake a room and move people in ways words alone never could. Every time he stepped on stage, it was as if he became part of the music itself, lost in the rhythm, completely alive. But even the brightest stars can burn out, and for Steve, the fire that made him unstoppable would eventually consume him. The music world adored him, but fame is never free. The pressure, the expectations, the endless need to perform, it all took a heavy toll. The rock star lifestyle pulled him into a dangerous spiral of substances and alcohol, numbing the exhaustion but robbing him of his brilliance. The same industry that once cheered his name didn't stop to help as he started slipping. By the mid-1970s, the cracks were impossible to ignore. The voice that once soared began to weaken, and the man who had once commanded crowds now struggled just to keep going. Humble pie fell apart, and suddenly Steve was left without the band that had been his lifeline. His career, which had once seemed unstoppable, started to crumble around him. As the years passed, the world moved on. The music industry is unforgiving, and without constant success, even legends can be forgotten. Steve tried to rebuild, but the weight of his past was always there, dragging him down. His name, once written in bold letters across concert posters, became just another memory in the history of rock. The money dried up, the crowds faded, and the adoration that once fueled him disappeared. 15. Axl Rose, Guns N' Roses. Axl Rose was once unstoppable, leading Guns N' Roses to heights no one thought possible. With appetite for destruction, he became one of the most famous and unpredictable rock stars of all time. He had everything: powerful vocals, stage presence, and a band that defined an era. But what happens when success becomes a curse instead of a blessing? Fame, instead of pushing him forward, seemed to drag him down. His perfectionism and volatile temper turned his own band against him. The release of Chinese Democracy became a never-ending nightmare. 17 years of delays, a budget of $13 million. And when it finally came out, disappointment. Fans who had waited nearly 2 decades were met with an album that barely resembled the Guns N' Roses they had once loved. Axl's behavior became more unpredictable. Lawsuits, public feuds, and no shows at concerts turned fans against him. He isolated himself from the music industry, and for years it seemed like his name would be remembered more for controversy than for music. 16. Joey Molland, Badfinger. Joey Molland was once part of a band on the verge of greatness. Badfinger had the potential to be one of the biggest bands of all time, with backing from Apple Records and the legendary Beatles. Their songs, like Come and Get It, climbed the charts, proving they had the talent to stand alongside rock's greatest names. But success can be as cruel as it is rewarding. Behind the scenes, Badfinger was falling apart. Financial mismanagement bled the band dry, turning their dream into a nightmare. The pressures became unbearable. Pete Ham, one of the band's key members, saw no way out and took his own life. Years later, Tom Evans followed the same tragic path. The weight of these losses cast a dark shadow over Joey Molland's career. He continued playing music, but something had changed. Badfinger's name was now forever linked with tragedy. Instead of celebrating success, Joey spent years fighting for the band's legacy, dealing with lawsuits and financial struggles. The man who once stood on the edge of greatness found himself lost in the wreckage of what could have been. 17. Wes Scantlin, Puddle of Mudd. Wes Scantlin had it all. His band, Puddle of Mudd, was everywhere, on the radio, on music charts, on sold-out stages. His songs were played non-stop, and his future seemed unstoppable. But then everything changed. Instead of reaching higher, he crashed lower than anyone could have imagined. His life became a whirlwind of arrests, addiction, and shocking public meltdowns. Fans watched in disbelief as his mugshots replaced his album covers, each scandal worse than the last. Every time he seemed to get back on track, another disaster struck. Headlines screamed of drunken outbursts, fights, and bizarre behavior on stage. Some concerts were cut short, others were disasters from the start. His voice, once raw and powerful, became unrecognizable. One infamous performance left fans speechless as he stumbled, slurred, and blamed the audience for his failures. But instead of taking responsibility, Wes made a shocking claim. He had been intoxicated by a former bandmate before the show. Was this true, or just another excuse in a long line of self-destruction? Fans didn't know what to believe anymore. Some held on to hope, waiting for him to prove he could rise again. Others had given up, tired of disappointment after disappointment. The industry, once eager to work with him, had turned its back. His career is now hanging by a single thread, and the big question remains, how much longer can he hold on before it snaps for good? 18. Aaron Carter. Aaron Carter wasn't just a pop star, he was a teen icon. In the early 2000s, his face was on posters, his voice was on every radio station, and his concerts were filled with screaming fans. He had platinum albums, hit songs, and a famous last name that made him even more recognizable, but his success didn't last. The money, the fame, the fans, it all started slipping away. And when Aaron fell, he fell fast. The warning signs were everywhere. In 2013, he shocked the world by filing for bankruptcy. The numbers were staggering, over $3 million in debt. How does a star who once sold millions of albums lose everything? The answer came in the years that followed. His personal life spiraled out of control. Legal battles, family feuds, and shocking arrests painted a dark picture. He was caught with substances, charged with driving under the influence, and seen in public, looking nothing like the boy fans once adored. But the most jaw-dropping moment was yet to come. In 2020, Aaron made a desperate move. He joined OnlyFans, selling explicit content online to make money. The news sent shockwaves through his fan base. How did one of the most famous young stars of the early 2000s end up here? It was a shocking turn that no one saw coming. Some called it a smart business move. Others saw it as the final proof that his career was beyond saving. Every decision he made seemed to pull him further away from redemption. Fans who once filled stadiums for him were now watching his downfall unfold in real time. Could he ever recover? Could he ever climb back to the top, or had he already fallen too far? These are the questions that linger. His story isn't just sad, it's a warning of how quickly fame can disappear and how some stars never find their way back. 19. Art Alexakis, Everclear. Art Alexakis gave the world some of the most unforgettable songs of the 90s. Santa Monica and Father of Mine weren't just hits, they were anthems. Everclear was at its peak, and Alexakis was the driving force behind it all. But as the years passed, his battles with addiction and financial problems overshadowed his success. Fans started to notice. His voice wasn't as strong, his energy on stage was different, and then came the news that no one expected. In 2019, he revealed that he had multiple sclerosis. The disease attacked his nervous system, making it harder to move, harder to play, harder to perform the way he used to. His once prominent presence in rock music started fading fast. For years, he had been the face of strength and raw emotion in music, but now his future seemed uncertain. Could he still push forward, or was the rock legend being forced into silence by a battle he never saw coming? 20. Vinnie Vincent, Kiss. Vinnie Vincent had everything. He played guitar for one of the biggest rock bands in history, Kiss. His solos were electric, his talent undeniable, and his presence on stage was impossible to ignore. But behind the scenes, things were far from perfect. His time with the band was short, and after leaving, his life took a strange and troubling turn. Legal battles over songwriting credits and failed projects painted a picture of a man struggling to hold on to his career. But then he did something no one expected. He disappeared. For years he was nowhere to be found. Fans speculated, was he in hiding, broke, or just tired of the spotlight? Every once in a while he would resurface, making brief public appearances that only raised more questions. His once legendary guitar skills seemed to have faded, and the man who once rocked stadiums now seemed like a ghost of his former self. What happened to Vinnie Vincent? And why does it seem like he's running from the world? Fans still wait for answers, but it's unclear if they'll ever get them.